Come on, ain't nobody who can resist this.
Security! Intruder! Over here!
Cyberpunk is a clusterfuck in so many different ways, and almost everyone involved, from developers to journalists to streamers, should be ashamed of how they contributed to it. The game itself is a bit like Frankenstein's monster, with a bunch of different types of unfinished games sewed together into an incoherent mess. It screams of project management failure, and I would not be surprised if most developers barely understood what type of game they were making. Gamers certainly didn't understand what type of game Cyberpunk was, and journalists was too busy writing clickbait articles about movie celebrities and how you could change your dick size to actually clear up the confusion. Most gamers also have something I like to call child brain, where their brains will go overdrive, constructing some kind of dream game whenever they get exposed to a hype machine. Hype merchants regard these people as suckers, but I want to protect them, and deep down I am jealous of them. But you can understand them in this case. I mean, if a game implemented all of this worthless fluff, and you can even customize your dick, then what is the limit of this amazing game? Well, it turns out that the limit was a functioning game. Again, this is a Frankenstein game caused by a project management fuck-up, where resources were spent on worthless fluff and modeling streamers into the game instead of focusing on the core functionality. But if we get back to the question, what is Cyberpunk really? Well, I have a friend who likes shooters. He played to the first combat section and then he just dropped it. So I think we can safely say that this is not a nice shooting game. Is it similar to Grand Theft Auto then? Well, it so happens I had a friend that thought it was like Grand Theft Auto, and he dropped it as well. The promo material pushed the Deus Ex angle, so how about that?
But think back. What would have happened if we hadn't met with the Militech agent? Or told Royce about the agent and her plans? Or just decided to buy the bot ourselves? So many options, so many possibilities, and each will have consequences that will ripple through the game world and your story. And that's just one quest.
Is this one of those immersive sims, which all the cool kids on YouTube can't shut up about? No way, man. Sure, the game have a simplistic stealth system, and you can choose to go loud or silent. But that is hardly unique, and with few exceptions, most missions are linear and scripted as all hell. We are also talking about a game here that can't handle car chases. Dynamic gameplay and Cyberpunk does not see eye to eye. How about Fallout then? Well, the combat in Fallout looks like shit. And is completely destroyed by its RPG mechanics, and this is certainly more similar to Cyberpunk. But it is still not a good match. If I would have a pie chart of all my time spent in the recent Fallout games, then I think it would show that almost all of it was spent exploring and fighting. In Cyberpunk, I would say that at least half of my time was spent in cutscenes or fake gameplay. Of course, this depends on how much open world content that you do, but the game is packed with cutscenes. I am not saying this as some dude bro who needs an explosion every second. I like narrative games and I'm fine with this, but this is certainly not for everyone. But coming back to the question, what is Cyberpunk? Well, as said before, it is a Frankenstein's monster of a game. A big chunk of it is a narrative game with cutscenes and walking sim gameplay. This is the competent part of the game. And when people say that they like the main missions, this is often what they refer to. Then we have the chunks for the combat and the stealth, and while not as nice looking as the narrative chunk, it is still functional. Finally, we have the chunk for the open world. If this would be an arm in this Frankenstein metaphor, then it would be a mannequin arm that someone has just rammed into the torso. It doesn't work and it's just there so that people might mistake it for the real deal from a distance. Point is that this is what Cyberpunk is, and if you expect anything else, then you will be disappointed. Before we move on from this metaphor, you should know that even now, 1.5 years later after launch, the whole body is still full of bugs. It is mostly not game breaking, but it sure ruins the immersion and the game feels janky as all hell.
I think that's for you.
Yep. No mistaking that ride ever.
You've scared me, you know that.
Didn't think anything could scare you.
Vad gör han nu? The performance is also crap. That is on an expensive man-child PC with ray tracing turned off. Ray tracing tanks the frame rate further when enabled, and is as usual completely worthless. Overall, the visuals are all over the place. In the right circumstances, the city can look really nice, and there are cutscenes and areas that looks good. There is also a lot of details in the environments which looks nice. A lot of time has been spent to make this setting come alive, and it certainly shows. So you can definitely cherry pick areas to make the game look good. But it all falls apart when you actually play the game. I played through the first couple of missions together with a friend, and even in these heavily scripted missions, it just doesn't work. The AI partner is teleporting around like crazy. The melee takedown animation looks rough. It just looks bad when the AI is driving the car. And then we get out into the open world, and of course we steal a car, and it just doesn't look good. Car crashes looks rough. Running over people looks terrible, and the yank and the bugs are ever present. Then we have the combat, which also looks really rough. Mixing role-playing with shooting mechanics is always going to be messy. It is silly as well in melee combat focused games, of course, when you need to stab someone a lot of times before they die. But there is still a certain dance to it, some elegance to it. For shooting games, it often turns into two characters standing next to each other and unloading magazine after magazine into each other, and it just looks bad. Same is true for Cyberpunk, and the enemies can be insanely bullet spongy. Besides that, the animations are weird, physics is strange, and the whole thing just looks stiff and old. But enough about the visuals, how is the gameplay? Well, the gameplay is really limited. The open world is not functional, and there is no dynamic gameplay to be found. AI can't handle car chases or anything fun like that, and the police will teleport to the crime scene instead of arriving by car. And since the police can't chase after you, you can simply drive away from them. In short, it sucks ass, and can't compete with open world games that came out 20 years ago. Basically, the open world is just a backdrop for missions, shops and some copy-paste activities. It is like the open world in No More Heroes, but probably 1,000 times more expensive. The vehicles are more fun to drive at least. The lack of open world gameplay is one thing, but sadly it spills over to the missions as well. If the game don't support good car AI, then you can't really have car-focused missions.
You look at politicians and see a cure.
Same of course with the lack of working boats, planes, helicopters and all the other fun things which adds variety to other open world games. What you are left with, besides the narrative gameplay, is the combat and the stealth. The gameplay then usually consists of you having to break into a building and either kill everyone or taking them down silently.
Probably nothing. Punch! Kill!
None of these playstyles are very strong and it gets repetitive after a while. The stealth is very simplistic. The enemies have really narrow vision cones, so it's quite easy to sneak up behind them. And it is made even easier with the Hitman style minima, telling you where everyone is and where they are looking. And if that doesn't work, then you can use some hacking to create distractions or disable cameras.
What was that?
It is a simple but functional stealth system, but you have seen this before and it is hardly exciting. Then we have the combat, which is not all that great. As I said before, it doesn't look good, and the enemies can be awfully bullet spongy. When everything clicks, then it can be okay, but never more than that.
Make him fucking pay! Squeeze the fucker dry! Great! Fuck!
Overall, the gameplay is just fairly limited and not varied or interesting enough to keep me interested. The game has some RPG elements, but they are very bare bones. You can level up the different weapons and your stealth and hacking abilities, but it is just not very exciting. The game also has some looter-shooter elements to it, and you constantly get new weapons and clothes. I guess it is fine, but it is not very immersive when your character looks like a fool and you are running around with a pink weapon that looks like a water gun. Finally, we get to the narrative part of this game. You play as V, who is a thug for hire in Night City. You get hired to do a big job, which of course goes to hell, and then you need to pick up the pieces and make sure that you get out alive. Everything in the narrative is cyberpunk with capital letters. It is not my favorite setting. I know that it is part of the theme that people are treated as disposable objects, but I often find it a bit too etchy, dark and depressing, and this game certainly lives up to that expectation. A lot of time is spent showing the different paths of this setting, and to some extent it is interesting. It takes a lot of time though, and my biggest complaint about the story is that it is a bit unfocused, and the important parts are rushed. I would have preferred if they scaled it down a bit and focused on fewer characters and topics. Instead of having 10 gangs that I don't know anything about, how about having 2 or 3 gangs which I actually have some connection to? Instead of having 100 characters I barely get to interact with, how about having 20 characters I actually get to know? The game has some longer quest chains when you actually get to spend time with some characters, and this is when the game shines. But then, there are so many characters and factions you interact with once or twice, and these I found very hard to care about. Perhaps a good example is a comparison to Grand Theft Auto. In San Andreas there is a first act where you are in the hood together with your old crew. Every member of the crew have a couple of missions, and you get to know these characters before the shit hits the fan.
Give up the money. This a raid.
Ryder, not this again.
It ain't me, fool.
No one else is that small. I feel sorry for your dad.
Same is true for Grand Theft Auto 4. There you have a large number of missions where you get to know your cousin, his friends, Vlad, the Russian mafia and other characters before things escalate. Cyberpunk don't have time for that shit. It's like bam, here you have a montage showing that you know these people, and now it's go time. Go, go, go. It feels really rushed. Another issue is that for a narrative game, the story interaction is quite limited. You get dialogue choices and sometimes they are even affected by your stats. But there are very few big choices with consequences. Most often, it is a very linear story. This is fine, but choices is a way to keep the story interesting, and the story can drag at times. That is the thing about narrative games. When a quest can be a one big 1 hour long walking sim section, then the story also needs to be stellar and keep me interested. And that is not always the case. I found the story to be very uneven, and when it didn't work for me, it was really boring to get through. The game also has an over-reliance on these brain dances, which is a way to analyze memories. It might sound like a puzzle, but it is just a full walking sim section, and they can be really slow at times. All in all, if I would treat this as a full narrative game, then I would say that it is an alright but uneven, big budget narrative game. It has some good moments which carries the story, but there are also plenty of long sections which didn't hold my interest at all. It is not a narrative game though, it is this weird Frankenstein game. For me, it was overall a very underwhelming experience. The narrative paths could be good, and there were some quest chains I greatly enjoyed, but the gameplay was mediocre and the open world paths were a complete mess. If you are really into cyberpunk stuff, then I am sure that you will like this game. Otherwise, I would take a step back and consider how much I actually like narrative games and how tolerant I am of bugs and mediocre gameplay.
Ah!